You were taught that consciousness is something your brain creates, that matter came first, then stars, then planets, then life, then the brain. And finally, somewhere inside the brain, awareness appeared, a private light behind the eyes, a fragile accident of neurons, a temporary spark inside a body. But a new paper published in AIP Advances by physicist and materials scientist Maria Strømme is asking whether that story may be backwards, not as a spiritual metaphor, not as a motivational idea, but as a serious theoretical possibility. The paper proposes that consciousness may not be an emergent side effect of matter. It may be a foundational field of reality itself, not your personal thoughts, not imagination, not the idea that your mind magically creates objects, something much deeper. Consciousness as a universal ground, a pre-space-time field from which space, time, matter, and individual minds may emerge. And what makes this so fascinating is not that science has suddenly proven spirituality. It has not, but it does something almost as important. It gives modern scientific language to a question ancient traditions have been asking for thousands of years. What if consciousness is not inside the universe? What if the universe is appearing inside consciousness? Because almost everything you have been taught begins with the same assumption. Reality is outside you. Consciousness is inside you. The world is out there. Awareness is in here. Matter is primary. Mind is secondary. But what if that is the original inversion? What if consciousness is not something you possess? What if consciousness does not belong to the body? What if the body belongs to consciousness? What if the body is not the container of awareness? What if it is a localization of it? A temporary arrangement through which something vast learns how to experience itself as limited. And if that is even possible, then the question is no longer only scientific. It becomes existential. Because if consciousness comes after matter, then you would be a brief accident in a universe that was never aware of you. But if consciousness is foundational, then your awareness is not a private accident. It is continuous with the deepest structure of reality. That changes what the self is. It changes what awakening means. It changes what it means to be alive. And it forces us to ask a question that sounds simple, but may overturn the entire way we understand existence. Does consciousness come from the universe? Or does the universe come from consciousness? The story we inherited is simple. Matter is primary. The universe begins as physical stuff, particles, forces, fields, atoms, stars, planets, bodies, brains. And once matter becomes complex enough, consciousness appears. According to this view, awareness is what the brain does. The brain produces experience in the same way the heart pumps blood, the same way the lungs exchange oxygen. Neurons fire, chemicals move, signals travel, and somehow, out of this activity, the feeling of being here appears. The feeling of seeing the world, the feeling of being someone. And at first, this view makes sense. Change the brain, and experience changes. Damage certain regions, and memory can disappear. Alter brain chemistry, and mood can shift. Stimulate neural circuits, and perception can transform. So it is easy to conclude that the brain must be the source of consciousness. But this is where the deeper problem begins. Because showing that the brain shapes experience is not the same as proving that the brain produces awareness from nothing. A radio can distort a signal. That does not mean the radio created the song. A lens can bend light. That does not mean the lens invented vision. The brain clearly shapes consciousness. It filters it, organizes it, colors it, localizes it. But does that mean the brain generates consciousness itself? That question is still unanswered. Science can map what happens in the brain when you see the color red, when you feel fear, when you remember your childhood, when you fall in love. But mapping the activity is not the same as explaining why any of it is experienced from the inside. Why is there something it feels like to be you? Why is the universe not merely processing information in silence? Why does matter not simply behave? Why does it appear? Why is there experience at all? This is the hard problem of consciousness. Not how the brain processes signals, not how attention works, not how memory forms. Those are difficult problems, but they are still problems about function. The hard problem is different. It asks why physical processes are accompanied by inner life. Why electrical activity becomes the taste of salt, the color blue, the ache of longing, the feeling of silence, the simple fact of being aware. Materialism assumes that consciousness emerges when matter becomes complex enough. But emergence does not fully explain experience. It names the mystery, it does not dissolve it. Because no matter how many neurons we describe, we still have to explain why there is a first-person world, why there is an inside, why reality is not just happening, but being known. And this is where the old story begins to crack. Because maybe consciousness is hard to explain from matter, because consciousness was never produced by matter in the first place. Maybe awareness is not the final result of physical complexity. Maybe awareness is more fundamental. Maybe the brain does not generate consciousness. Maybe it localizes it. Maybe it gives universal awareness a particular point of view, a body, a nervous system, a memory, a history, a name, a face, a story. And once consciousness localizes through a body, it begins to feel personal. It begins to feel like me. But the feeling of me may not be the source of consciousness. It may be one shape consciousness is temporarily taking. This is the first reversal. You are not simply a body that somehow became conscious. You may be consciousness temporarily appearing as a body. This is where Maria Strømme's paper becomes important, because it does not simply say consciousness is mysterious. It tries to build a framework, a theoretical model where consciousness is not added to the universe after matter appears, but is part of the foundation from which physical reality emerges. And we should be clear, this is not established physics. It is not a settled scientific conclusion. It is a speculative, theoretical proposal, but it is interesting because it tries to formalize a consciousness-first model instead of leaving it as pure philosophy. The paper introduces three linked principles: universal consciousness, universal mind, and universal thought. These are not meant as ordinary psychological terms. They are not talking about your personal opinions, memories, emotions, or inner dialogue. They are describing a deeper structure. Universal consciousness is the field of awareness itself, the capacity for experience, the fundamental presence through which anything can appear at all. Universal mind is the organizing potential within that field, not a human mind, not a personality, but the underlying order through which possibility can become structure. And universal thought is the dynamic movement, the differentiating principle. The process through which undivided potential becomes specific experience. In simple terms, universal consciousness is the field. Universal mind is the organizing potential. Universal thought is the movement by which reality takes form. This is the radical part. In ordinary thinking, consciousness appears inside space and time. The universe is the container. Consciousness is the content. But in this model, that relationship is reversed. Consciousness is the deeper field. Space and time emerge from it. Matter emerges from it. Individual awareness emerges from it. Before form, there is not nothing. There is undivided potential. Before space and time, there is not empty absence. There is a pre-physical ground. Before separate things, there is unity. Then differentiation begins. The paper uses ideas from physics to describe how a unified field could become a structured reality. One of these ideas is symmetry breaking. Symmetry breaking is what happens when a unified state becomes differentiated. Something that was once balanced and undivided begins to form distinctions. Difference appears. Structure appears. Pattern appears. In this context, symmetry breaking becomes a way of imagining how a universal consciousness field could differentiate into the appearance of many things, how unity could become multiplicity, how the one could appear as the world. The paper also refers to quantum fluctuations, tiny disturbances, movements within potential, the kind of instability through which something can arise from what looked like emptiness. Again, not emptiness as nothing. Emptiness as possibility. A field not yet appearing as a world, but capable of becoming one. And then there is discrete state selection. This means that reality does not remain as infinite possibility. Specific states become actual. Potential becomes this, not that. A form appears. An event happens. A world becomes experienceable. So the model suggests some movement from undivided consciousness to organizing potential, to dynamic differentiation, to space-time, to matter, to individual awareness. And the individual is crucial here, because in this framework, your consciousness is not separate from universal consciousness. It is a localization of it, a focused expression, a point where the field becomes particular enough to experience itself as someone. You are not an isolated consciousness sealed inside a skull. You are a localized expression of a deeper field, a wave of the ocean, a flame of the fire, a temporary face of something that was never truly divided. And this is where we have to be careful. The paper does not prove that consciousness creates the universe. It does not prove that ancient mystics were scientifically correct. It does not mean your personal thoughts control reality, but it challenges the assumption that matter must come first. It gives structure to a different possibility. Maybe consciousness is not the strange exception in a dead universe. Maybe consciousness is the condition through which the universe becomes knowable at all. Maybe awareness is not the final product. Maybe it is the first principle. And maybe matter is what consciousness looks like when it becomes form. What is strange about this idea is that it is only new in scientific language. The intuition itself is ancient. Across different wisdom traditions, we find the same reversal appearing again and again, not always in the same words, not always with the same metaphysics, but with the same basic direction. Consciousness is not something the individual owns. The individual is something appearing within consciousness. In Advaita Vedanta, the deepest reality is called Brahman, the underlying reality behind all appearances, pure awareness, the ground of existence. And the individual self, Atman, is not ultimately separate from Brahman. The self only appears separate because consciousness is being experienced through a limited body, mind, and perspective. In that view, the deepest truth is closer to what I call I, appears within consciousness. The wave does not possess the ocean. The wave is the ocean, temporarily shaped as a wave. Another non-dual tradition from Kashmir gives this idea a more dynamic expression. It does not treat the world as something outside consciousness. It sees the universe as consciousness expressing itself. Consciousness becoming form, becoming movement, becoming perception, becoming body, becoming world. Reality is not a dead machine observed by awareness from the outside. Reality is awareness in motion. The universe is consciousness taking shape, the one appearing as many, the field becoming experience. And then there are Buddhist traditions, which explore the inseparability of mind and world. Buddhism does not usually describe this as one eternal cosmic self. It is more subtle than that, but it points to something essential. You never encounter a world outside awareness. You encounter reality as appearance, as perception, as relationship, as experience. The world you know is always reality, as experienced. Not because nothing exists, not because everything is fantasy, but because subject and object are not as cleanly separate as they appear. The observer and the observed arise together. Mind and world are entangled in the act of experience. And this is where the ancient traditions and Strømme's paper begin to resonate. They are not saying the exact same thing, but they are questioning the same assumption from different directions. The modern materialist story says, matter is fundamental, consciousness appears later. The non-dual traditions say, awareness is fundamental, the world appears within it. And now, this new theoretical framework is asking whether the ancient direction deserves to be reconsidered. This is where the idea becomes personal. Because if consciousness is foundational, then you are not what you have been taught to believe you are. You are not merely a biological machine producing private experience. You are not a little mind trapped inside an indifferent universe. You may be a localized point of awareness inside a field that is already whole. The self is not the source of consciousness. The self is a pattern within consciousness, a focal point, a temporary stabilization, a place where experience gathers and says, I am this name, this body, this memory, this history, this story. And because consciousness returns to the same pattern again and again, identity begins to feel permanent. The wave forgets the ocean. The character forgets the awareness in which the story is appearing. Localization becomes mistaken for isolation, and that is where suffering begins. Not because the self is wrong, not because the body is a trap, not because the world is false, but because a temporary form begins to believe it is separate from the field that gives it existence. The body starts to feel like a boundary. The mind starts to feel like a prison. The world starts to feel like something outside you. But if consciousness is primary, then the body is not the container of awareness. It is the instrument through which awareness experiences a particular angle of reality, a temporary arrangement through which something vast learns limitation, learns contrast, learns relationship, learns what it feels like to be here. This does not make your human life less meaningful. It makes it more mysterious, because your awareness is not an accident. Your silence is not empty. Your experience is not a meaningless spark in a dead universe. There is something here before thought, before identity, before memory, before the story of me begins. Something that does not need a name to be present, something that remains when the mind becomes still. You can notice it now as the simple fact that experience is happening. Before you describe or judge it, awareness is here. Before you become someone, in relation to it, awareness is here. And maybe this is what awakening has always pointed toward. Not escaping the world, not rejecting the body, not pretending the self does not exist, but recognizing that the self is functional, not fundamental. It exists, but it is not the whole. It matters, but it is not the source. The world does not disappear. The body does not disappear. The personality does not disappear. But the orientation changes. You stop trying to find consciousness inside yourself, and begin recognizing yourself inside consciousness. This is why the deepest spiritual insights often feel less like learning something new and more like remembering something obvious, something prior, something you knew before you knew anything else. And if Strømme's paper is even pointing in the right direction, then the ancient question returns with new force. Maybe consciousness is not the final product of the universe. Maybe the universe is one of the ways consciousness becomes visible to itself. Maybe matter is not the opposite of spirit. Maybe matter is spirit localized. Awareness slowed into form, the infinite, appearing as the particular, the field looking through your eyes. And maybe you were never a fragment moving through a vast and indifferent universe. Maybe you were a vantage point through which the universe was learning how to experience itself, a temporary face of something timeless. And when that is recognized, life does not need to become perfect to feel sacred. It already is. And maybe beneath the name, beneath the body, beneath the story, so are you.